Hi guys, the current business secretary Grant Shapps appeared on the Nick Ferrari show where he was asked about striking workers. Now, Ferrari had a perfect opportunity to ask Shapps a number of questions, such as, why are workers on strike at the moment? And why were people who are currently engaging in industrial action using food banks, including the NHS, before the war in Ukraine? But once again, a missed opportunity because Nick Ferrari wanted to push the line that the unions just hate the Tories. Have a listen to this.
WT, what look would it be for the Conservative government if we had the rail staff, the nurses and the teachers all on strike? You're not really competent in handling this country. Are you? Not you personally, the government, is it?
Well, look, I think it's a reflection of the fact that
you're hated, that the Conservatives are hated, basically.
Well, hold on, Nick. This is below you. Every Western country is experiencing
I'm older than you,
huge
and I go
pressures.
back some years to see this level of industrial. And if you don't like the word, the level of opprobrium, then directed towards your government.
Well, look, often the unions, and of course the opposition, Labour, who are paid by the unions £120 million since 2010, will take this approach. But
what's this got to do with Labour? And yes, Labour is supported by the unions because it's in the name, all right? Maybe the Conservatives should be called the Billionaire Party because they're supported by billionaires.
What I would say is just have a look. Let me finish answering your point. Look what's happening across the world right now, where inflation has spiked at levels we haven't seen for decades. Why has that happened? Very simple. Putin illegally invaded Ukraine, pushed up energy prices, pushed up inflation, and interest rates have gone up. Now, not surprisingly, people working in the public sector then go, hold on a minute.
Mrs Jones, the geography teacher, deciding to go on strike is not the cause caused by Vladimir Putin.
Yes, no, of course.
You and I have known each other long enough.
So Grant Shapps is suggesting that teachers are on strike at the moment because of the war in Ukraine. Schools have been crumbling before the war in Ukraine. Teachers have been underpaid. They've seen numbers exit the profession before the war in Ukraine. They've been underpaid before the war in Ukraine. They've seen class sizes increase before the war in Ukraine. And Nick Ferrari Grant Shapps here is trying to say, well, it's because of the war in Ukraine. Nick Ferrari believes it's because the unions just don't like the Tories.
Come on.
Of course.
This is an extraordinary breakdown in industrial relations between the Conservatives and the unions. You have to go back to the days of Mrs Thatcher for this level of animos.
People are striking, and actually the teacher unions have said the same, because they say, rightly, that inflation is very high and the cost of living is therefore too high. Why is inflation that high? Very simple. Putin invaded Ukraine.
But then why aren't we seeing teachers on strike all over the world? Or at least let's eliminate half the world and let's just focus on advanced economies. Why aren't we seeing massive teacher strikes taking place in Europe? Why aren't we seeing GPs going on strike or junior doctors going on strike in Europe as well? Nurses on strike in Europe? No, that's not happening. Why is that not happening, Grant? Or Michael Grin, or whatever the hell you call yourself?
Legally, we are paying the costs of war. And as I often say, and I comment to the Ukrainians who live in my house, for them, they're fighting on the front line. Not for them because they're out the country, but for their families. They're fighting on the front lines. For us, freedom isn't free. And there's a cost. And the cost is that we have had to pay very high inflation. And that has led through to every sector of the economy and all the public services. And what a responsible government has to do is balance those perfectly proper demands for higher pay with the tax that we would have to raise from all your listeners in order to pay it. So
these are current gas prices. As you can see, they spiked during the war in Ukraine when it started, and during the later part of August, September. But look where they are now. They're actually about the same level as before the war in Ukraine. So Grant Shapps can't say, well, it's the war in Ukraine that's driving this. If gas prices have reduced, but the problem is, of course, much bigger than that. You can see here, this is from Open Democracy. Private schools pocket millions in COVID loans denied to state schools. What the Tories have been doing since 2010 is providing more funding to the private sector, for example, when it comes to education, than the public sector. So public schools are failing. They're not getting the funding they need. Teachers are going on strike because class sizes are increasing, schools are crumbling, investment isn't there. But the private schools are booming. And you're even hearing the likes of the Prime Minister saying, well, you know, if people want to go to private schools, they should have that option. We shouldn't tax the fees. We shouldn't impose VAT on the fees that private schools are charging, because it will discourage people from sending their kids to private schools. You know, a natural response, a Tory response should be, well, if you can't afford the private schools, then maybe you should get a better job. They don't care about schools. They don't care about the NHS. They're happy to see these things crumble and fall apart. And the idiocy of, yeah, it's because of the war in Ukraine. These problems existed long before that. But of course, they're trying to use this argument, well, it's freedom. We have to, you know, this is the cost of freedom. And you have, unfortunately, commentators like Nick Ferrari, who's obsessed with this idea that it's the unions against the Tories and the unions just want to bring down the Tory government, which isn't helping. There are real problems, structural problems, recruitment problems, retainment problems in the NHS and in education that are not being dealt with. And that's why teachers and nurses are on strike. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.